Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I do a lot of presenting. Do we need this? We might need that. I do a lot of presenting and have the privilege of working with some of the biggest media companies in North America. And I wanted to tell you some stories about leadership that I've witnessed over the years. So when I was putting the content together, I'm like, how do you whittle it down to 4 stories? Okay, 5 great stories from great leaders and what they taught me. So here's some leadership lessons that I've learned over the years. The first comes to you from a gentleman that I met about 12 years ago in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. His name's Donnie Moores. Donnie Moores played for the Los Angeles Kings. He had an injury early in his career, and he's recruited by a newspaper group called Black Press. Black Press is located out of Victoria, Canada. David Black and I did some business together when I was in the publishing business. And David said, you know, George, you should go meet Donnie. He's going to go to the Red Deer Advocate newspaper, and he's going to fix this thing because it was a mess. What was going on at the newspaper was there was no transparency between management and the staff. The press room was unionized, the mail room was unionized, the writers were unionized, and they didn't trust the ownership group that owned the paper. Black Press had just purchased the paper from a firm out of England, and they sent in their superstar, Donnie Moores, was going to Red Deer. So I went to see Donnie on his 3rd day at work, expecting to meet a guy in a suit in an office, and no, they sent me to the mail room because there was Donnie inserting inserts into the Red Deer Advocate newspaper with the mail people. The publisher of the newspaper, the guy that was running the entire business, his first thing that he did when he went to that organization was he went to the mail room because there was no transparency between the staff and leadership. So being a leader isn't a title, it's actually what you do every day. And I think Donnie showed a lot of leadership. Later in his career, they sent him to Hawaii, which was a bit of an improvement over Red Deer. For those of you who've been there, nothing against Red Deer. But Donnie did the exact same thing again in Red. My friend Bob Cadis is here, and Bob and I have known each other for about 30 years. Worked in the media business, and he worked in the newspaper. I don't think you saw very many publishers work in the mailroom. I want to talk about another gentleman that I met back in 1996. His name's Vern Trail. He is a legend in broadcast. Anyone who's in the broadcast business knows Vern Trail. Vern Trail is famous for a couple things. Number 1, he is a straight-up cowboy from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Canada. I knew the guys from Moose Jaw would like that part of the story. But what Vern is really famous for was he was a general manager at Super 8 CHAB for about 20 years, but he spent about 4 years in Vancouver. And he went to work at a radio station called LG73. Back when AM radio was a big deal, LG73 was the kick-ass station in Vancouver, Canada. But not when Vern got there. It was a mess. I had the privilege of working at Vern at a radio station, and in his first day, he showed up as the consultant. He was going to come in and fix this radio station that I was involved in. And on his first day, he walked in, cowboy boots, bit of the cowboy jacket thing that you buy at Claypool's, not like a suit jacket, like a cowboy jacket. And he reaches into his briefcase and he says, hey, Leith, come with me. And he had a chisel and a hammer. And he went and he took every door in the building off its hinges. Because what he had found in that organization was there was way too many closed-door meetings. Nobody really knew what was going on in the organization. There was, again, no trust. So, no closed doors. His level of leadership was taking those doors off and breaking down the walls so that people felt like they were a part of that organization. This was the first guy that I ever worked for. His name is Jim Blundell. Now, some of you may know a Blundell because there's a very famous Blundell in Canada. His name's Dean Blundell. That's Jim's son. Dean Blundell got fired from Edge 102 in Toronto, and he's also the radio broadcaster that's been written up the most times by the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council. One of the times he got written up was because Steve-O urinated on his floor of his studios in downtown Toronto. But it's okay. Dean landed on his feet at the Fan 590 in Toronto. He's doing the morning show there now. But Jim Blundell was one of the first people that I worked with in the broadcast industry. He was the general manager and vice president of the radio station that I started at in Rosetown. And I still consider Jim to be probably the best sales manager that I've ever met. Jim currently runs all of Rogers Media in Vancouver, and for the last 15 years was the lead sales trainer for all of Chum Radio and Bell Media. But back in 1985, Jim came up with a secret. It's so funny because right now when we go into the U.S. and we work with some of the biggest media companies all over North America, especially in the U.S., they're all talking about needs assessment. You got to find out what the client wants. You can't just push product down their throats. Well, in 1988, Jim Blundell taught me to do the full well sales system. And what the full well sales system was a 4-page survey. And you went out and you asked some questions. But what he really taught me, and I didn't figure it out. At that time, I was 18 years old. I didn't know anything at that point. But later in my career, what he taught me is leadership is about listening. It's not about standing there and pontificating. It's about listening and then bringing some sort of a lesson that can influence people. This gentleman is currently the president of the Calgary Flames. His name is Ken King. Ken King is from Hanley, Saskatchewan. Any of you who've driven up and down this highway just outside of town have been to Hanley, Saskatchewan. I got the privilege to meet Ken King when he was the publisher of the Calgary Herald. It was back in 1997. The Calgary Herald at that time was doing about $170 million. They had 670 employees, and they had just installed a state-of-the-art press. It was a robotic press. It would take the very large rolls of paper, and a robot would take it and put it onto the press rather than a forklift. It was about a $200 million purchase that they had put into that building. That's a beautiful building, by the way. But when I went to meet Ken King in his offices, where he took me first, the first place that he took me was the daycare that he had installed at the Calgary Herald for those 670 staff members that worked there so that they could be close to their kids. And the second place that he took me was the place where you drop your dry cleaning off and the place that you go to buy some groceries if you forgot to get milk on your way home, because he wanted the people that worked at that organization to feel like they were part of a community. What he said to me that day when I met him was, I feel like the mayor of my own little town. It reminds me of Hanley. When I come to work at the Calgary Herald, I am the mayor of this community. I'm responsible for every person that works there. And he said something to me that day I'll never, ever forget. He said, I have 670 families that I'm responsible to them to make sure that they have a paycheck. I'm responsible to make sure that they can feed their kids. Any of you who work with me, I use that term feed the kids a lot, but that was the first person that had ever used that. I want to talk a little bit about learning, because I think sometimes people have the tendency to feel that leaders just lead and they don't continue to learn. But some of the people that I work with today that are the best leaders are always learning. They're always taking in new information. They don't accept the status quo, that this is the way it's always been done, or that I know the best way. In fact, if you were to drill into those people, maybe after a couple glasses of wine, those leaders, they'll tell you, I don't really have it figured out. I've got to keep learning. So we have a tendency to want to work a lot. I work with a lot of workaholics. I happen to be one. But I think you need to balance that work ethic with learning to make sure that you are always learning so you can have those new things that you can do to help people be leaders. On Sunday night, I'm flying into New York. I get the privilege working at Vendasta. We get to travel and work with some fantastic people. About 3 years ago, I met a gentleman named Jim Thompson. Jim Thompson is currently the Vice President of Audience for Billboard Magazine and The Hollywood Reporter. I consider Jim a friend, and we've started on a little quest. And Dan Robinson's around here. Dan's in the auto space. We're stealing something from the auto space, Dan. Auto dealers have a thing called 20 groups. So they get 20 like dealers together, and they compete against each other. Because as much as you may think this happens, the Ford store in Saskatoon doesn't actually compete with other Ford stores in that community. They want to compare themselves to Ford stores in other markets to see how they're doing. So they have these dealer 20 groups. They get together once, twice, 3 times a year, and they hold each other accountable at the very highest level, the dealer principal, the general manager. So my friend Jim and I are starting a 20 group of vice presidents and CROs that are going to get together a couple times a year and hold each other accountable to help those leaders to learn more things. And one of the things that is on our topic is how to recruit the very best people. Because I really believe in all the leaders that I speak to, the people that are doing a very, very good job, is they make sure that they surround themselves with the very best talent. And they're always looking for that next superstar to take themselves to the next level. Surround yourself with the very best people. That's my presentation. Are there any questions? There you go.
I didn't. It wasn't me.
In
Oh,
back.
right there.
Tall gentleman.
So have you figured out how to surround yourself with the best talent yet?
Well, I have a bunch of people that I'd like to introduce you here at Vendasta Technologies because we have the very best talent. That was not a planted question. Any other questions?
Other questions? This side of the room?
Thank you very much.